Level loss, XP loss, corpse runs, slow boring camps. What else? Lack of solo content in between group content. These are all things that I absolutely hate about Project 1999 and old school EverQuest. But I still play these games. What's up with that? We're going to talk about that today. I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renville, the bearded dwarven princess in the flesh. And we're going to be diving into these topics in greater detail so we can understand why do we still do things that we don't enjoy in games. It's a conundrum. Before we get diving any deeper, though, shout out to all of the supporters here at the Adventurers Guild and our patrons over at the Patreon page because you are the ones who keep the lights on here. More information at the end of the video on how to become a member and support the channel. In the meantime, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get more updates like this. Without further ado, let's dive into topic one on the list here, which is camps. So, one of the things I absolutely cannot stand in old school EverQuest and Project 1999 is the idea of a camp. Sitting somewhere for hours on end and doing nothing. You're just sitting there. Now, depending on your class, you might be being a little more active than others. Like a warrior, you're going to be constantly taking care of mobs, and as a puller, you're going to be pulling. As an enchanter, you're going to be enchanting. But apart from that, even if you are playing those classes, it still very much is we've got to the camp, we're now staying in this camp, we're not going to see anything else here, and we might be here for 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions maybe, because the way the levels are designed in EverQuest, you have such a huge level range that you're going to go to this area and you're going to pull mobs for the next 3 to 5 levels. And because leveling is so slow on old EverQuest and Project 1999, you're going to be there for quite some time. To me, that is boring. I much prefer dungeon crawling in modern MMORPGs. A couple of the games I think do this the best are World of Warcraft Classic and EverQuest 2. The pacing on the dungeons is very good for me. You're constantly on the move. Now, some of you out there are going to say, but Tim, you have socialization when there's downtime. There's plenty of time to talk to your group. I would argue that if you have not tuned into any of our multi-streams, you don't know what you're talking about because we are very social. It's just that we're social in voice chat, even while we're playing EverQuest 2 and World of Warcraft Classic and these other faster paced games. The socialization is still there, it's just moved to a voice chat format. Old school EverQuest was designed when we didn't have voice chat and we were just typing. So the downtime in that game, in P99 and Old school EverQuest, is designed around being able to type to your friends. That's no longer the case. It doesn't apply. We're in 2022. Quit telling me that these old school games were designed for socialization in mind. They weren't designed for socialization in mind. They were just designed that way. We've gotten better at level design. We've gotten better at dungeon design and everything else. Modern games are where it's at. So, yeah, I don't like camps. Second on the list is XP loss. This comes back to respect my time, please. I do not want to have to go into a game and be penalized for something that's not my fault. Anytime you start talking about, and these are three things that are going to be combined together, which is XP loss, level loss, and corpse runs. The argument that people always make is like, well, this just teaches you how to play. You just need to learn how to play. If you knew how to play, you wouldn't die. And if you didn't die, you wouldn't have level loss, and you wouldn't have your XP loss, and you wouldn't have to do a corpse run. You just need to learn how to play. What happens when my power goes out? What happens when there's a storm and my internet goes out? What happens when I'm standing there at a bank and someone pulls a mob to the bank and FDs or dies there, and then I die because they died and I died out of an accidental death? I have now lost XP, lost levels, and could potentially have a corpse loop, um, if that was my spawn point as well, all for things that are outside of my control and have nothing to do with me playing the game and me actively doing something that would cause a death due to stupidity or ignorance or lack of paying attention. So I just completely disregard anybody out there who says that, well, XP loss is a great tool to teach you how to play the game. No, it's not. You're already teaching me how to play the game, and you're punishing me enough when you make me waste my time. Wasting my time is anything that takes me out of forward progression in the game. And if I have to do any sort of running back to my corpse, then you've already punished me enough because I'm having to waste time on forward progression by going back to my corpse. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here because I'm not talking about corpse runs. I'm talking about, say, World of Warcraft Classic. You die, you get a ghost, you can, and you run back to your corpse, right? And that run might be 90 seconds, it might be 3 minutes, you never know. But the run back to your corpse is a punishment on top of the armor ding that you're going to get hit with the degradation to your gear. I don't need to be penalized beyond my time. My time is precious to me. The number one most valuable resource in my life is my time. And when you penalize me for time, that's it. That's all you need to do. You've penalized me. I don't need to be penalized beyond that. This ties into level loss. Respect my time. If you're making me lose a level when I die, you're not respecting my time. You're harshly punishing me for stupid reasons. Now, again, people will argue, well, that teaches you to learn how to pull. It teaches you how to work within the group because if you pull properly and you learn how to group and you're careful and you do all the right things, you're not going to die. And therefore you won't lose a level. So if you're losing a level, you're obviously doing something wrong. Again, I have lots of power outages where I live. We have storms that roll through. I lose power. I lose internet. Just recently in Project 99, we were standing there in the outpost in Furiona Vi, and somebody ran by who was new to the game, and they had a pirate in tow, and they died right on top of us. And my ranger died because they died. Not my fault. And yet I suffered a loss. And that's not right. Not only is it not fair, it's just poor game design, which is why I have no patience for XP loss. I can understand the argument of, well, learn how to play. Maybe. But again, this goes back to at the time that this game was designed, they didn't know any better. And now we have many, 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 many other ways to penalize you. I am a big fan of like the way EverQuest 2 did it, and they still do it on the TLP servers to some degree, which is the uh, adventure debt. You have XP debt. So when you die, it's not that you lose any experience, it's that now you have a little bit of debt that you have to clear when you go back to killing mobs. That's a fair, penalty, but it also doesn't take into consideration those accidental scenarios when my power goes out or my internet goes out or, the server goes down and we're in the middle of a dungeon or somebody does something crazy and pulls a train on top of our group and we all die to somebody else's train. I should never, ever, 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 ever be penalized for something that's not my fault. And by putting a blanket penalty over everything, you're wasting my time and you're punishing me for something that isn't my fault. So I'm never going to be in favor of XP loss or level loss. Now, corpse runs, the reason I'm against corpse runs as they are in P99 and EverQuest is because all of your items stay on your corpse. Again, this was, back in the day, we just accepted this because it was the way it was, and we didn't know any better. And as we've come along over the years, we've seen that there are many, many, many other great ways to penalize players for dying that has nothing to do with leaving their items on their corpse. I'm a big fan of taking the hit, to your the durability of the item. EverQuest 2 does this. World of Warcraft does this. I think that this is a great way to, especially if you've made the cost of this expensive. Now, people will argue that in modern WoW and modern EverQuest 2, you don't feel the sting because you earn so much coin that it immediately makes this irrelevant. But it wasn't the case when these games first launched. EverQuest 2 in particular, because I was heavy into that game when it launched, and I didn't play World of Warcraft until Classic came along. EverQuest 2 had a very expensive um, ding to your equipment, and you lost 10% every time. And that could be a situation where if you're in a dungeon or if you're in a raid and you're constantly dying due to bad pulls, it's something beyond your range, all of these things that are factoring in. You got 10 tries, and that was it. And then you had to go out. You had to leave the dungeon and go back to town, which means suddenly I'm not only being penalized for having to leave the dungeon, I'm also being penalized because I'm going to have a very hefty repair bill at the end of that. Then we got into crafters being able to make repair kits that you could bring along with you, which is great. Those repair kits were very expensive to make, so it focused guilds into pooling their resources together to make these repair kits that you could bring around on raids to help offset that. But the cost was always so high that it truly felt like you were winning the game if you had a repair kit with you. It's like, woo, I can get rid of the costs of having to spend that coin on my own, which is why so many guilds would usually, like what we did with our guild, was the guild will cover the cost of repairs for everybody on the raid. Because it was just so expensive, and I'm a big fan of that as opposed to item loss. Because item loss does not respect my time, and I'm a big fan of respect my time. If you want me to play your game, especially in the modern era, you need to respect my time. Let's get around to number 5 on the list, which is the lack of solo content in between group content. And why I used to be okay with this, but I no longer am. Back in the day, this is the only thing we had to do with original EverQuest, and we didn't know any better. That's just the way the games were designed. It was all about the group, and so we would deal with the fact that sometimes you couldn't do anything other than sit there and be LFG, sometimes for hours on end. Now, I didn't really suffer from this myself because I had a good static group and I had a good guild, but I had a lot of people I knew in my circle who played a class that wasn't necessarily favorable for getting all the guild groups, and so they would often be sitting there looking for a group for hours on end, and that sucks. Now, I have seen this more recently in World of Warcraft Classic because the era that we're playing right now with the Burning Crusade, as of this recording, right as we're getting ready for Wrath of the Lich King, there's a lack of tanks. And sometimes at weird times of the day when Maduros and I have been on playing and we want to go run a dungeon at like 9 o'clock in the morning Central Time, we've been sitting there looking for a tank for 45 minutes to an hour. Okay. Not a big deal in World of Warcraft Classic. Why? Because there are things I could be doing in the meantime. We have solo quests we're working on, duo quests we're running around, we're making forward progress. But in an old school EverQuest and Project 1999, you're pretty much dead in the water unless you have a static group. Now, I know some people are going to argue, yeah, but you could totally solo if you rolled a druid, or if you rolled a shadow or a shaman, or if you rolled a necro, or if you rolled one of these 4 or 5 classes that can solo. But what about all the other classes that can't solo, like the warrior, as an example? Um, there's not a big enough argument in favor of, well, you should just roll a class that can solo well then. Not everyone wants to play one of those solo classes. A lot of people want to play a specific class in old school EverQuest Project 1999. And that's the one thing that sucks about going back to that is that you don't have this. And one of the things we talked about recently is why do I play Project 1999 if I hate these 5 things, right? Because these are 5 things that heavily feature into Project 1999. And a lot of people would say that's part of the challenge of Project 1999 are these 5 things. And I would argue that that's actually not the case. What many people mistake as challenge in Project 1999 is simply a lack of quality life features and poor game design that we didn't realize was poor game design at the time because it was the earliest iteration of something we'd ever seen. So we didn't recognize the flaws in that. And that's no different than any first draft of a novel, first draft of a comic, first draft of an art piece, first draft of a sculpting piece. The first draft is always going to have flaws. It's always going to be shitty. And you refine that over time until you get to the final draft. And that's very much the way the iterative process has worked with the generations of MMORPGs. So looking at a game like Project 1999, we can look at these things and say these 5 things, among others, are the flaws in the early draft process. Now, not everyone looks at them as flaws. Some people say, well, I like the fact that you have a hardcore death penalty because that teaches you how to play. And I'm always going to say to those people, but what about me? What about when my power goes out and when my internet goes out and when someone does something that kills me and it's not my fault, I should not be being penalized for those things. So you have to factor those things in, and game developers have done a good job of that over the years of putting penalties in place that don't penalize people for things that are outside of their control. I enjoy playing Project 1999 once a week because I have friends that I do it with. So I have a static group, which means I never have to be looking for a group. And my camps are always fun because I have a social component going on where we are very active in voice chat and we are always streaming together in the multi-stream groups. So it makes it easy to ignore those lack of quality of life features. I've been very vocal about the fact that I've died a couple of times, like with the pirate example, and I was very pissed. I was very pissed when that happened, and it made my night very unfun because I lost a bunch of XP due to someone else's stupidity that had nothing to do with me. And those are the times when I'm like, there's no reason for that, and why am I here? And the reason I'm here is because one thing that OG EverQuest and P99 has that no other game really has is a such a heavy focus on group-based gameplay that when you have a static group, and you can go in and do that content together. It is very fun when you're doing it as a group with a solid group of people because the risks of dying are very, very small because we all know what we're doing and we're very well schooled in this and we play well together, which makes it fun and it makes it easy to ignore the 5 things that I hate about Project 1999. Love to hear yours. Drop them in the comments below. And if you want to support the channel over on Patreon or beyond, you can check out all the links below and join the list of people who are supporting this channel. Thank you so much, everybody. Until next time.